I always wondered what Daemon's weakness is going to be, and judging by the current events of Two Blue Vortex, it seems like he's going to lose the crown of the strongest, that too by Mamushi. And this had already been foreshadowed in part 1, with this small internal monologue of Bug, as well as his reaction to Himawari's power from chapter 77. It has been years since we are trying to find an answer to how the cyborg kid will be defeated, and the person who actually knows the sauce is now a Shinju, who is targeting his most precious person. This means the defeat of Daemon is now inevitable, and there are so many hints to back this up. Although he was renowned as the strongest character in part 1, Kashin Koji never relied on him for the war on the Shinju. This could be because the flaws in his abilities could easily be exploited by the god trees, and that's exactly what might go down in a couple of chapters. Koji has confirmed Mamushi has some special ability, and he has already came up with a way to defeat him as well, which might or might not involve Daemon, but would need the oversight of Shikamaru. So today we will dissect everything about the fate of Daemon in Two Blue Vortex, including the outcome of the Sarada situation, how he stands no chance against the Shinju, especially Mamushi, and finally what exactly could be the counter to his reflection ability. The current arc of the story seems to be paying off a lot of elements from the cohabitation saga of part 1, as well as its prelude, which is the battle between Code and Daemon. First it was the act of Sarada and Sumire, where they were pretending to be infatuated with Aida, and now that they have been exposed, Daemon has held one of the girls on gunpoint for breaking their trust. Next up is going to be the interesting legacy of Code's loyal follower Bug, who knew exactly how Daemon's ability worked, and the decision of the writers to turn him from a disposable character into a pervy monstrous Shinju could actually do wonders for the plot, especially for the development of the cyborg siblings. The time frame given by Kashin Koji before the invasion of Mamushi is 1 week, and Sarada getting exposed at the same time might not be a coincidence at all. It could provide an emotional angle to the story if something happens with Aida and Daemon, and here is why I think so. In another future scene by Kashin Koji, Sarada can be seen fighting Hidari, meaning this situation doesn't escalate at all. But at the same time, Shikamaru had warned them in the cohabitation arc that if Daemon gets to know that they are immune, then he won't spare them. So Sarada coming out alive only means that Aida has commanded Daemon to leave them, cause their immunity makes them see Aida as a real friend, and they are not acting fake like the others. It would be cool to see this transition into a backstory of Aida and Daemon, since we know almost nothing about their background. And when you look at how there is 1 week time period before Mamushi strikes the village, a backstory of the cyborg siblings could help us to connect with them more, and the only reasons for the writers to do it would be to make the readers feel bad once they succumb in the attack of Mamushi. On top of that, every future that Koji saw and planned, something unexpected had always taken place, like Konohamaru not dying by Matsuri as he had intended, and Boruto interfering in the battle to completely change the course of events. So something unexpected, which can be termed as a Black Swan event, could also happen in this upcoming battle between Mamushi and Konoha, which would again change the following events in a massive way. So what exactly could it be? Well, this is where the role of Mamushi comes to light. He's solely there to bring some importance to Aida and Daemon, cause without him, they would have remained pretty much irrelevant in the story. So first we need to understand the true reason behind him targeting Aida. He has revealed in chapter 26 that why his instincts were pushing him to go for Aida, and it's not as simple as devouring her. In the words of Mamushi, he wants to take the control of Aida, and also wants to make her superior genetic information his own. Well, the look on Hidari's face says it all. This can have a lot of different meanings. Some believe that he wants to play a ditty on Aida just to reproduce with her, cause in the next line he says he doesn't care about love, and according to him, the divine trees need to thrive more as a species. Here he is completely going against the notion of Jura, which is to understand how love rules the human species. Mamushi could be more interested in the other aspects of a species, which includes producing offsprings, and while love is usually a core part of that, it's not always necessary. But if we keep this ditty part aside and focus on what I believe Mamushi is after, well, his infatuation with Aida is not that different from why the other Shinju made some specific people their target. Sasuke shared parental love with Sarada, therefore she became Hidari's target. Moegi had romantic feelings for Konohamaru, that's why Matsuri chose him. And Gaara was the most important person to Shinki, that's why Ryu was after him. The only different thing in Bug's case was that he was trapped in an artificial love-cum-lust type of relationship with Aida due to the powers of her omnipotence. The charm of the sorceress made Bug her slave. He could neither rebel against her nor refuse her will, and not to mention he must have spent almost 10 years guarding her, since Amado and Jigen had met 12 years prior to the events of part 1. So Bug pretty much was under her control all the time, and he even knew a lot about their abilities. Well, more on that later when we will reach the part that deals with Daemon. But this obsession of Mamushi with her superior genetic information could only mean two things. Either the Shinju have fragments of their past lives and memories engraved in their minds, which fuels the decisions that they make in this life, or he was just fascinated with her Otsutsuki power of the Senringan that she used to spy on them when he first saw her. Now if the memories part is true, then the redemption of Hidari is almost inevitable once he sees the Mangenkyu Sharingan of Sarada, but let's keep that for another video. Well, I feel like in Mamushi's case, it's actually both. He not only remembers their superior biology and abilities from past life, but he's also enchanted by her Otsutsuki based powers. In other words, the Shinjutsu that she obtained from the cells of Shibai, which rewired her entire genetics, making her a superior species. Mamushi first saw Aida when she was peeking in the Shinju hideout with her Senringan, and that's when he decided that she will be his target. But there is something about this panel that I believe explains the true meaning of his statement from the latest chapter. Remember in the anime when Momoshiki looked directly into Boruto's Jogen and told him that he seems to have inherited the power of the Otsutsuki? Well, here he was definitely referring to the Jogen, as he can be seen directly staring at it. Now when you take the case of Mamushi, he also stared at Aida's Senringan with dead eyes, and connecting that to the statement about superior genetic information, I believe he's fascinated with this godly power of Aida, and he somehow wants to make them his own. He also clarifies in the chapter that he does want to devour her, but not only in the sense of consuming her. So here he isn't saying that he doesn't want to consume her, he just has some other motives on top of that as well. But once he does consume her, he will have the key to all the superior genetic information which is packed in her body. In other words, he will obtain the Shinjutsu of Shibai Otsutsuki, something that would make him thrive in a totally different manner. Also notice how no other Shinju targets is an Otsutsuki, and Aida is the closest to them since she is a cyborg, and this is how everything lines up. But this dream of Mamushi might not come true, cause Kashin Koji has already formulated a plan to defeat him, as well as finding a loop to his ability. So what exactly could be this new technique of Mamushi? Well, what if I told you it's also the weakness of Daemon? Well, before going over to how that makes perfect sense, we will need to take a look at Bug, the human counterpart of Mamushi, who knew a lot about Daemon's ability and its counter. He had acquired this knowledge by living with them for years, and this could also be the root cause of Mamushi's infatuation with Aida's divine biology. He was also the first person to point out that Daemon cannot reflect any attacks when his hands are not touching anyone. Well, that's a pretty complicated nuance in the story, since there were times when he wasn't touching anyone with his hands, yet the intention of the other person got reflected, like Kawaki here in this panel. Furthermore, there is also a chance that he can turn his ability on and off on command, just like a threat detection system. And when you look at what Daemon means in computers, well, it's a program which always runs in the background. The name and game of Aida, Daemon and Code has been derived from computers, like Aida being named after Aida Lovelace, who was the first female computer programmer. And when you look at how omnipotence gets quoted as a programming language, it makes some good amount of sense. Code's name has been taken from computer code, and he has been the activation code to pretty much every new major character. Now before I move on to explaining what Daemon's weakness actually is, let's explore something that will add a lot more sense to it. So far there was only one time when there was a sense of fear on Daemon's face, and that is when he sensed the hidden power of Himawari, which later gets revealed as the Biju Chakra of Kurama. While some say he was just surprised cause he couldn't understand how such a strong power would emerge out of an innocent girl, I think it was actually fear, and a major reveal from chapter 25 solidifies this possibility. So when Himawari was training with Kurama in her inner realm, he told her that she's no different than Jura or him when it comes to biology. Basically, Himawari is like a Biju, and she was the only person who amazed Daemon with the passive intensity of her Nine-Tails chakra. Now the person who will be fighting Daemon is Mamushi, and he also isn't any different than a Biju. So does this mean that Daemon will have a sense of fear after fighting him? Well, I would say actually yes, especially after he cancels out his reflection power. But before explaining how, let's get a deeper understanding of why Daemon being fearful of the Biju makes perfect sense. The Ten-Tails have been used by the Otsuzukis to create god trees, and usually the process needs one such being to be fed to these monsters. This ritual helps the Otsuzuki to thrive and evolve themselves with chakra fruits. But if you spin the narrative in a sense where the Ten-Tails would gain intelligence, which is what has happened in the story as of recent, look at the reaction of Aida when she saw Mamushi. She was shivered to death, and this instance was symbolic to how the Otsutsuki, the undefeatable race in the universe, would react upon seeing an actual predator. Daemon's reaction to Himawari, who's a human Biju, was no different, so this solidifies this possibility even more. Even the Grimes of Code were really resentful towards Kawaki only because he was an Otsutsuki. So the cyborgs being the first Otsutsuki archetype to get destroyed and devoured by their universal enemy makes perfect sense. And there we are back to Mamushi, as well as his plans of obliterating both Aida and Daemon. Keep in mind he will need to bypass the reflection power of the cyborg kid somehow, which is quoted as the most broken ability in the verse, based on his unmatched agility and strength. So as for how I believe the bug Shinju would ultimately defeat Daemon, I think his devouring Ten-Tails instincts could allow him to attack an enemy mindlessly, meaning he wouldn't think of anything while attacking his opponent, and when his mind would be empty and only his instincts would be at work, it will make him completely immune from Daemon's powers, since his ability reacts to the thoughts of the people, and when there is an opponent who has none of them with only the will to devour and destroy at work, I don't think Daemon's ability would be able to counter any such attack. Now there is a good example to amplify this possibility. We know Daemon's ability is at work all the time, meaning it works in the background, as shown in this panel where it even reflected the Shinjutsu of Code. But there was one moment where it failed to activate, and that is the moment when Boruto grabbed him from behind in chapter 77 when he was going for Himawari. Technically his ability should have pushed him back, but it didn't, and you can say it was because Boruto was not a threat to him right here. Well, so isn't Mamushi, cause his mind won't be thinking about harming him when he goes for an attack. So attacking Daemon without intention could deal some real damage to him even if his ability is at work, and that's why the people who are similar to a Biju could actually do some harm on him, and maybe that's why he was shocked to sense Himawari's intensity back then, cause a similar case of mindless malice has actually been seen in Kurama's behavior throughout Naruto. The Nine-Tails was originally a pure embodiment of instinct and destruction. He didn't strategize or count consequences, he simply lashed out with overwhelming malice. For instance, during Naruto's early transformation, Kurama wasn't thinking about battle tactics or threats, he was purely in beast mode, consumed by his will to destroy. Even Orochimaru noted that the attacks came without hesitation or conscious intent, just raw instinctual malice pouring out. This is why no ordinary counter strategy worked, cause Kurama's mind wasn't producing thoughts that could be manipulated, he was just acting. So if the Ten-Tails side of Mamushi is actually going to take away the crown from Daemon in a similar manner, well, at least you would remember hearing this on my channel when something like this actually happens in the manga. I personally don't feel like we will be in a Sarada versus Daemon type of situation, so no theory on that from my side, but I have already covered some of the more fascinating topics and you can check them out in these videos. I will see you next time.